what is fear? What is the true essence of fear? If we go deep into this concept through a true inner investigation, we may realize that fear is the central pillar of something that we call ego, that is our egocentric consciousness. So, fear is the essence of ego. And if we try to better understand what ego is, what our egocentric consciousness is, we will find that this consciousness is divided into different centers of ourself. Using the universal teaching, we could say that we have at least 3 centers or 3 layers of this egocentric consciousness in us. The first center is associated with our head, with our mental life, the life of our thoughts. The second center is our heart, our emotional life. And the third center, to simplify things, could be called our hands, our life, the center of our actions, of our interaction with all the ones around us and everything that surrounds us. So, 3 H's here: head, heart, and hands. And if ego and fear are pretty much equivalent, or they have a direct correlation, how is it that fear manifests itself into our threefold consciousness? We could describe that manifestation as different kinds of different types of fear. In our head, associated with our thoughts, this fear could be classified as concern or preoccupation. In our hearts, the fear that manifests itself as an attempt to anticipate reality, to control reality, could be translated as anxiety. And in our hands, or in our life sanctuary, in the center of our actions, fear is fear itself. The fear of dying, the fear of ending our existence, the fear of being attacked, the fear of being threatened, and so on. So we'll call it fear itself. So if we really look closely at these 3 different types of fear, we will realize that they are all based on a state of scarcity, a state of emptiness, because we are always trying to fill our identity with something, or we are always trying to anticipate everything that is going to happen around us, because we feel weak, we feel unprotected. So we try to do that with our thoughts, and we create countless mental images, countless thoughts, and our inner dialogue is really endless. We live in a state of anxiety with an extremely agitated and unbalanced emotional life. And it's almost unnecessary to describe the state of fear, because we feel threatened all the time by anything that can happen, either to our physical identity or our body, or to the safety we have in our homes, etc., etc. So we always live in this very uncertain, very unbalanced state of consciousness or state of ego, the egocentric consciousness. I think this is pretty obvious, and we can all empathize, and we can all understand that and correlate our situation with that state of consciousness and life. And it is also very common to try to overcome concern or preoccupation with a certain attempt to have a positive mental attitude, or to have positive thoughts, or to avoid negative and dark thoughts. But in essence, when we truly pay attention to our thoughts, we realize that they work pretty much on their own, and the level of control that we can exert on them is quite limited. The same happens with our emotional life. We try to be brave, we try to be courageous, we try to connect ourselves with faith. We try to find some inner basis to avoid this endless turmoil of emotions. But in essence, we truly live a very anxious life. And the result of that in our consciousness and even in our health is quite obvious. And the mental state and the emotional state, they translate themselves into a state of life. And here we don't mean, let's say, the biological limitations. Even animals, of course, they sense fear. And fear is a basic mechanism of self-protection. But this situation, this biological background or situation, gets severely aggravated by the total lack of balance of our mental and emotional life. So, we try to project a different image. We try to find some inner basis to live a better and more balanced life. But in the end, even if externally we may demonstrate some of those qualities that we seek so desperately for, if we pay attention to ourselves, we truly know who we are. We know exactly what kind of life and what kind of emotions and thoughts and reactions we have inside, like a boiling water. For those that realize that, they try to follow a path of transformation. They try to follow a path that will allow them to live a different life. And here we mean, for example, the esoteric world, and all the attempts and all the initiatives that we try to implement, that we pursue, sometimes so desperately. In the sense of our head, in the sense of our thoughts, our mental life, so many people, they seek for the occult. They seek for the hidden powers, the hidden senses. Others, they look for or they search for a mystic experience, an experience that may detach their consciousness from the physical existence and project their consciousness into the astral world, into the etheric world. And others, they try to put in practice their hidden powers associated with magic abilities, magic possibilities, such as healing, such as influencing others, most of the times, countless times, on a positive way. But even those that seek for that transformation, they end up realizing that this different state of consciousness and of life that they seek for, that they look for, is very, very fragile, almost as if it was an instant that comes and vanishes, comes and goes. And it's only, it is as if they touched and reached a frontier, and then, time and again, they fall back on their true state of consciousness and life. So, despite of the fact that, in most of the cases, those attempts, those efforts are extremely valuable, especially for gaining inner strength and inner experience, we must realize that all those efforts, they don't lead to a true transformation. So they are not a true self-revolution. And what is the cause for that? Why doesn't that work? Should we try harder? Should we find another method, another set of exercises? Should we find a better guru or a stronger master? What is the cause of that? The true cause that the universal teaching points at is the fact that we are trying to transform ego with ego. This is so obvious. But we can understand that mentally, but when it comes to the practice of our lives, we still have a lot to learn. Because time and again in our lives, we are trying to free ourselves from ego through ego, with everything that the ego has. We try to calm down the thoughts of our ego with stronger thoughts of our ego. We try to organize our emotional life, selecting the emotions that we qualify as good ones and trying to put aside those that we call negative ones. But in essence, we are trying to change the wheel of anxiety through the same elements that constitute that wheel. And we are trying to escape this fundamental state of inner poverty, of inner emptiness, of this basic fear for losing our existence by trying to live more intensively, more in a more balanced way or whatever. So we are trying to escape the prison by making the prison better, by building new walls, new windows, by expanding the prison. But we continue to be prisoners. Prisoners of ourselves. Prisoners of our own ego. So that's why the universal teaching tells us, and that message has reached the human being in all times and in all places, with different symbols and different words, but always the same message. And the message is, until we are able to recognize that our ego, our egocentric consciousness, cannot be perfected, cannot be developed beyond the boundaries of itself, we'll be within those boundaries. But the moment that we recognize that from inside out, based on true experience, after countless attempts, countless experiences, and maybe countless lives, then we will realize that there is a totally different basis, a totally different starting point that, in a nutshell, we could call the spirit spark, the true center of our being, the true center of the self in us, the true self that lies behind, hidden by our super-developed ego. But when this ego has gone through these countless experiences, then it will realize that the only power that can overcome itself is the true self, this spirit spark. This spirit spark is the basis for the self-revolution. It is the basis to transform consciousness and then to transform life. And how does that work in practice? How can that be accomplished? Is there a method? Is there a list of exercises that we should go through? Is it something that we could train? Is it a set of different thoughts? Or some sort of emotional exercise? Or some sort of magical or occult practice? Actually, no. The only possibility to go through this self-revolution is to become the revolution yourself, is to become the path, is to become the journey, or to transform your whole life in this journey. It is a true effort that the human consciousness must commit to. But this commitment is something totally different than trying to become better, to become happier, to become more balanced, to become more powerful. It is the effort to overcome yourself based on something totally different. So, this spirit spark that we represent with the simplest possible symbol, that is a dot, a point, is the basis to start transforming our innermost identity. The first level of freedom, because this process is to establish once again the original freedom of the consciousness. So the first step in this path, in this journey, is to reestablish self-awareness. So after this countless experiences, this center is able to awaken the center of the human consciousness and make this consciousness aware of itself, aware of its own limits, aware of the craziness to try to pursue the path of spiritual development based on its own ego. So this basis will be able to transform the human consciousness step by step. The first degree of freedom is to allow the consciousness to be once again self-aware. Based on this self-awareness, the consciousness will be allowed to observe its own inner world on a very small way to begin with. But that's the beginning of a new power, a new or a second degree of freedom that the universal teaching calls self-knowledge. So based on self-awareness, the consciousness can gain freedom to start truly observing without judging, without trying to interfere its own inner world, and then gain a bigger awareness of its mental life, of its emotional life, and of its reactions. And when this second degree of freedom is reestablished, even minimally, when based on self-awareness, we are able to regain self-knowledge, then a third degree of freedom can be accomplished. That is the degree of choosing. When we are identified with all these automatic reactions of our thoughts, our emotions, and our reactions, we actually have no freedom to choose anything. We look almost like robots, because we are lived by our thoughts, our emotions, and our reactions. But when we have regained this self-awareness, and based on the self-awareness, we have reached some level of self-knowledge, then we can make this inner movement of our consciousness, as if we were free to move innerly for the first time. So it means that we can choose to follow the voice of our ego, of our egocentric consciousness, or we can choose to follow or to listen to this voice of the silence, to this voice of our true self, to this voice of this spirit spark. This is the third level of freedom. And based on this third level of freedom, we can then finally regain the freedom to act based on our consciousness, on our true inner consciousness, on our true self. And this possibility of acting is what allows us to start freeing up ourselves from all the automatic reactions. We have become self-aware. We have become aware of our inner world. We have gained some true inner self-knowledge. Based on that, seeing that, we have once again the freedom to choose which energy, which power will flow through our consciousness, which impulse we will become attached to, or will become under the influence of. And then, based on that, we can, for the first time maybe, we can act again freely. This is just like the spiral of a rose that gradually unfolds in us from one degree of freedom to the other. And through this inner process, through this path, through this journey, the threefold consciousness can be transformed. And the transformed consciousness can then transform life. In essence, this threefold consciousness will no longer be a total prisoner of concern or preoccupation, anxiety, and fear. But from this threefold consciousness, other three elements, totally different three elements will emanate. This consciousness will be connected with self. Self will give this consciousness freedom. And based on self and freedom, this consciousness will arise in a totally different state of life that we could call compassion. That is the ability to interact with the whole world and all mankind, not anymore based on our egocentric consciousness, but on the true consciousness that has emanated from our true self. We hope that these elements may give you some material for your own inner search. And we are hopeful that through this inner search, you will find your own answers. The objective of the modern Rosicrucian is to go this path in the modern world for the modern human being, not as a lofty, distant dream, but as a true possibility. The possibility to overcome fear and the possibility of living a true life of compassion. Thank you.